2025 was the year of AI slop, but 2026, this year, AI actually disrupts the software lifecycle. Welcome back to You're Doing It Wrong. It's been a while, I realize that, but a lot has happened in the last 6 months for both me personally and in the world as a whole. I've moved to a new location, and there's been many challenges in that, and the world is reeling from inflation from the AI explosion and conflicts in the Middle East that are raising prices for all sorts of things. There's no deals on computers anymore. The RAM shortage due to AI data center buildouts is causing prices of computers basically to remain stable or increase by quite a lot, especially in the server space. There may be some relief in the future as capacity comes online in the next 12 to 18 months. But will that capacity be eaten up just as fast as it is right now? We just don't know at this point. The refresh cycles for all sorts of hardware are going to be extended, from gaming systems to corporate servers. Everyone's going to be holding on to systems longer. This also goes back to the Windows 10 issue, right, that we spoke about last year. Is it just too costly now? I mean, hopefully most people were able to upgrade their systems, but maybe not everybody was. And now it's just way too costly to do that. So you might be looking for alternative options. But this is good from an environmental standpoint if you want to look at it that way, right? So people are sweating assets longer. That's a better thing rather than things going back just into landfills. Recycling is, still only halfway there, right? So most of it ends up in the landfills. But, we can hold on to things longer and run them longer. And you'd also think that used systems might be a way to go. You get used system off eBay or a refurbished system. They might be cheaper, but really there isn't a whole lot of discount. People are buying those up too. It's like the cost of cars and used cars during the COVID pandemic. Right, there was a shortage of new cars, so used car prices went up. And we're seeing the same for computer hardware. For companies that are trying to refresh a bunch of systems, they've got to rethink their needs. A year or two ago, it would be standard to over-provision those servers and buy 512 gigs to a terabyte of RAM per server, sometimes more. But you really have to justify the need for that much RAM these days when RAM's gone up 3 to 5 times or more in some instances. And companies might want to start looking at how much RAM overhead they really need, right? And adjust the VM creation around that, and around the actual needs of the application. Windows 11, I've noticed, has been terrible on RAM usage, basic install, and just the browser open, and you're using up almost 16 gigs of RAM. Windows 10, I think, was closer to 8, right? So, will businesses, when you're talking about 200 virtual machines or so, start getting away from Windows VMs and going more to Linux, which is much more memory friendly. And if you can reduce on 200 VMs in a data center, you can reduce each VM down by 8 gigs or so. That's 1.5 terabytes of real world RAM savings, which is actually more like 2 to 2.5 terabytes because it's usually spread across multiple servers for failover. So you'll need that extra, not just in one server, but in multiple servers. So, one 128 gig memory stick, a DDR5, data center RAM is anywhere between 4,000 and 10,000 Australian dollars. And you'll need about 16 of them, right? So on the cheap side, that's maybe 64,000 Australian, maybe 40,000 US. But, on the high end, it's up to 160,000 Australian, over 100,000 US. And that's if you can actually get the hardware, right? That's to say, even if you wanted to buy it, you could, but that's not always the case. We know that some server vendors are quoting, but they actually can't fulfill any servers for many months. That all their capacity is already sold out for several months, and and so the prices are just continuing to be volatile. In the PC space, it's not so bad. Prices seem to have stabilized a bit. Thankfully, DDR RAM, which also went up about 3 times, it's sort of stabilized. DDR5, which is what all the new servers are using, is definitely going up. But the big AI and cloud providers, right, they're betting that if it's too expensive for you to refresh your hardware and buy systems from premises, that you'll subscribe to their cloud model. And they're betting big. And they're building out these massive AI data centers, right, as well as just normal data centers. But for them, the cost is a long-term investment, right? But for people with small footprints, it's not really bad to move to the cloud model. But it depends. It depends on your own circumstances. It depends on your principles. It depends on, what sort of control you need to have over your data, right? And we've talked about that before. But we've seen computing over the years go from mainframes with dummy terminals, and then you had the rise of the PC, the personal computer, and then back to server-based compute, and then now it's cloud compute with browser-based clients. But as we start to see AI, the hardware to run massive LLMs like ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude is huge, right? They need these massive data centers because the context windows that they're trying to give to the users is massive, and the sheer amount of information that they're trying to put in these LLMs and load that into RAM, right? And particularly RAM that sits on the GPU, to keep the speeds up it's too much for a normal computer. You need massive scale computers for that. And the models are getting better and quantizing them smaller and smaller so that, versions can run on normal computer, normal laptop. They're getting better, but they're not quite as good, and they won't be quite as good as the cloud versions. Right? They just can't be. You're quantizing it down to fit into a smaller, footprint, and that works in some things, and particularly agents. Like agents are exploding right now, because you don't really need something super powerful. They're usually limited in the scope that they're trying to accomplish things, right? And you might just have limited decision framework that it needs, rather than this massive large language model, which is good at everything. But LLMs are here to stay, and AI coding is definitely here. And while 2025 there was probably the year of AI slop, right? 2026 is turning out to be the year that AI makes a massive impact. Anthropic's new model might be a game changer for security review of software. They're saying, they haven't even released it out to the general public yet, and they're allowing all the software vendors to get their code reviewed before they release it out, because attackers might use this to find vulnerabilities, and hackers are using AI and AI agents right now to attack, to create and find new vulnerabilities and attack and string together automated decisions around around security, and they're doing it at a pace we haven't seen before. Right, it's super fast. That AI is speeding all these things up. So running applications through security vulnerability scanners has been a thing for a while. The new AI LLM ones is now a must for your software development life cycle, right? You can't get around not doing that these days before a release. Otherwise, somebody will do it and they'll find issues, and there'll be 0 days all over the place. But it's also good for the software vendors, right? They're finding things before they release it, which is great. Now, for the doing it wrong award of the day, I was shown this post on Reddit about a guy that spent a bunch of money on AI cloud subscriptions to write some applications, and we'll see it there on the screen, and hasn't been successful. But this is the real you're doing it wrong. If you don't know how to use AI and you're not a developer, right, this isn't for you. You have to have some sort of knowledge about the subject and what you're doing with AI, right? You can't just be a novice and expect AI to hand it to you on a silver platter. In some cases it can. For deeper, more involved work, you really need to guide the AI system. Also, you have to understand how AI systems work. You have to understand context windows and other things, and what it's good at. You got to break things down into smaller chunks for the AI to be able to, perform better without the hallucinations, and you got to instruct it properly. You got to understand the outputs, right, to catch it and correct it. You got to know when to start a new chat, when things go wrong, because you can't really get rid of that old bad information. It will try to keep that around in the context window. So you got to understand memory threads. All this to say that there's still some expertise that's needed around, the work that you do using AI. It's a tool. It's not a total replacement. But AI is definitely starting to change things, and I've heard of AI doing hiring interviews. The first couple rounds of interviews with potential employees, is done via AI. And Google now has an AI booking agent where it'll call for doctor's appointments and restaurant reservations, and AI will actually make those calls for you and come back. It's pretty crazy. But we're seeing a lot of things thrown at the wall, right? Especially 2025. It was the AI slop copilot and everything. And some are going to stick. Some will stick to the wall, some will fall away. That happens, across every technology that comes about, right? Everything new. You're just going to throw a whole bunch at it and see what works. But we're starting to see a bunch of more useful applications of AI. But the real usefulness in business is going to be when companies start to revisit their processes, how they do things, right? Why they do things. When you start bringing in AI into the mix and you revisit these processes, that's where change is really, really going to come. And a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, they're betting on this, right? So that's why you're seeing a bunch of mass layoffs, because they're not saying, ooh, ChatGPT, can make it so that we only need one business analyst and they can feed it, that sort of stuff. No, they're thinking about whole business processes that they can change to rework what they need in their workforce to look like. And there's going to be many industries where jobs are eliminated, and that job won't exist anymore. And that obviously is scary for some. And we know the big companies can afford to move very quickly on this in this space, but the smaller organizations and government, they just don't have the capability and the teams to be able to pull that off and move at that speed. But the technology is out there, and so much of it is open source. It's free to learn, it's free to change and develop into whatever you need. So smaller companies can get an advantage here. They can move quick if they want to invest in that. But the really small businesses will struggle because they probably don't have the cash to invest to reorganize. But this can also really be scary for your normal big software vendors, because you can turn an open source business app into a customized solution for your business that, fits your needs better than a big, well-known name vendor. And all you need is a pretty good developer and some AI vibe coding, right? It can happen. And it doesn't take that long. Especially when you're talking about experience or these big SaaS players where it's built on technology from 20 years ago. And you can build it on the latest and greatest technologies, including memory-safe languages like Rust, cross-platform UI and development things like Tori, which are browser-based and can work on any system. Right? Building these out is pretty easy these days with AI and vibe coding, and then you add AI vulnerability scanning without having to pay for expensive security code reviews. Right? It's a game changer around bringing development back in-house. For businesses that want to have a crack, this could be a major change for them and a way to save tons of money. But in reality, it's really just the mindset. For many years, the motto has been, nobody ever got fired for buying Cisco. Even when its competitors had better products, brand names still meant something. But for how long? We've seen this in retail purchasing. People realize that a lot of things come from the same factories with different brand names. And the brand name that's more expensive isn't always better, right? And Temu, AliExpress, even Amazon Haul now are realizing this. They're soaring in popularity. Yes, not everything is great, but for a lot of people, it fits their need. So will this move to businesses that have historically played it really safe? They've kept technology purchases with the big tech players. Will this new generation of leaders reject the ABC, the always buy Cisco mentality? And this is where the AI commodity will really change things. Can you move faster than the major software vendors at meeting your own needs and meeting the needs of your business? Just like every change, some will be scared, some excited, but we all need to realize the genie is out of the bottle. Can't put it back in. AI is here to stay, so let's make sure it's used for good. Happy start to 2026. Let's hope there's a bit more calm in the coming months, but at the pace of things happening lately, I don't expect it to be. Don't count on it. I'll be back soon. Thanks for watching, and please leave some comments about how you're doing in 2026.
The silicon is static. The cop in the cycles, we're holding the cycles while the inventory grows old. 12,000 for glass, 10,000 for air. The rack is empty, but nobody is there. We're extending the refresh, we're watching the light. The server room's humming deep into the night. The bottle is broken, the smoke has escaped. The reality's folded and the architecture shaped. You're doing it wrong if you don't know the thread, if you don't hear the logic that the machine has said. The genie is out and the logic is deep. A promise of order we're struggling to keep. Context windows closing. The agents alive in the garden of slop. Only the guides will thrive. Break it down, chunk the logic, run the rust, watch the hallucination, turn to trust, security review in the SDLC. The machine is watching what you cannot see. The bottle is broken, the smoke has escaped. The reality's folded and the architecture shaped. You're doing it wrong if you don't know the thread, if you don't hear the logic that the machine has said. The genie is out and the logic is deep. A promise of order we're struggling to keep. Nobody got fired for choosing the name, but the logo and the factory floor are the same. The ABC is over, the lock-in is the cost. Open source the future before the core is lost. Brand name is a relic in a rental code world. Watch the new flag slowly being unfurled. Don't count on the calm, the pace is the point. The genie is loose in every joint 6.